Well, hey everyone, welcome back to episode 7 of the Holy Youth Ministry podcast, where we look at youth ministry from a 30,000-foot holistic perspective, where we're not just talking to youth pastors, but people who care about teenagers, especially parents. And we have two wonderful, seasoned veterans of parenting here with us today. Would you two care to introduce yourselves?
I'll go first. Okay. I'm Hailey Violette, and gosh, let's see here. We've been here at Cornerstone. I've been here pretty much since high school myself, college. My husband Darren, the same.
So you've been here, what, 10 years?
Yeah, 10 years. And I have teenagers. Darren's an elder here. We've got 3 kids. Catherine just graduated. Faith is 15, and Avery is 12.
And I'm Becky McCourt. I've been married to my husband Brian for 21 years.
21.
Yeah, just the other day, 21. And we have 3 kids. One daughter who's almost 17, one daughter who's 14, and then a son who's 12.
Wow. So you both have 3, so you've been outnumbered for a long time.
Yes, yes, for sure.
And I've heard that the jump from having one, you're terrified because you don't know what to expect. When you have your second, you're terrified because you know what to expect. Right. But then when the third one comes along, it's just like, this is easy.
Yes.
But you are outnumbered.
Yeah,
For sure.
And did you ever have a moment in parenting 3 children where you're like, what have I gotten myself into?
Yeah.
Did you ever have that moment?
Brian answered this question every day.
that's so funny.
But I have a specific instance where we brought our oldest home from the hospital, right? That car ride where you drive so slow and I'm sitting by the car seat making sure she's breathing.
Yes.
Yeah. We get home, lay her in the crib, and I remember thinking, now what?
Yeah.
What is next? But the Lord is good and faithful in there. But yeah, that was the first moment.
There's no handbook.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there's back in our day, it was like what to expect.
Really?
What to expect,
That's right.
And then what to expect the first year. And that was my parenting Bible the first year. It was a book, and it was like, week by week, month by month, like what you should expect for that age range. Now there's apps.
Still out there.
Well, there's apps.
Yeah,
I think-
exactly.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah,
it's
Kelsey
like,
has-
my
Kelsey has an
baby's
app
a
for that.
watermelon now, or whatever, whatever.
Right.
I didn't have
Yeah.
that, but it's funny because you had asked that question, and I was like, I don't ever remember thinking that, but I don't know that it never happened. It's probably just my memory because my kids have completely sucked my brains right now. So.
Every time people are,
In God's grace, I've forgotten any moments where I might have.
and my I have 2 daughters as well who are younger than yours, but even, I mean, I can't even remember the first couple months of my 2-month-old's life, right? So then when I have parents be like, oh yeah, back when my kids were that age, and I'm like, do you really remember?
Well, it's funny because when you said, what have you gotten yourself into? I was thinking of it more of like, what did I do to get myself into a parenting situation, And I was like, I couldn't remember, but certainly I found myself in situations where there's a challenge. I'm like, what do I do?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So but it's, again, and it was funny as we were praying before this podcast, and I'm saying praying ain't for the weak, and then Hailey goes, but actually it kind of is.
Yes,
and so
parenting is
I'm
very
still
weak.
I'm still ruminating on this as we started into this great theological insight of, yes, parenting is for the weak, and that's okay. But so when you started out as parents, again, you 18 years ago with Catherine graduating, 17 years ago, Ella's a junior.
Yep.
This year. Just took it 2 more years. Awesome.
Yeah.
And gosh, so sad that I only got 1 year of Catherine in the ministry, but
young adults.
But young adults, and she's been great.
That's right.
Oh,
Yeah. Good.
jumping in both feet.
Yeah.
When you started out as parents until now, how would you say parenting, the idea of parenting, the praxis of parenting, has shifted in our culture?
I can start with that
you
one.
start.
The first thing that came to mind was the handling of technology and even the evolution of screen time. So when we started parenting, it was just monitoring your child's screen time really solely based on the TV.
Yeah.
Maybe video games,
Yeah.
but through 17 and 18 years, the accessibility of technology now is on every little screen, even your own. Right? Their
Yeah.
own phone, iPad, devices, video games, all the things laying around the house. And so that really has been, Yeah, one of the biggest challenges of parenting through the ages and stages.
And I would say related to that is, for me as a parent, taking in resources. Like the way that I learn and grow and things like that. Like I've taken in more, like used to be able to read more books, but now I have a lot of different like social media accounts that I follow or things like that, where I'm learning and growing about parenting through social media and online. And it's to the point where it's almost like too many voices. Like I can't keep up with all the podcasts, and I can't keep up with all the Instagram people that I follow and stuff, because it's so much coming in that now as a parent, it's like, there's too many voices to sort through, where I didn't have hardly any voices when I first started parenting. It was my parents' voices, my friends' voices, and I might read a book. I might read a few books a year. And that was it. And it was very simple. And now there's just too many voices to sort through. So it's good and it's bad.
Sure.
You know?
And even you're talking about, I mean, you are an adult, right?
Yeah.
And that's overwhelming. The saturation of so many voices is overwhelming to you with mature brain. Again, lots of experience. Can we even begin to imagine the effect
exactly
of it on?
Exactly.
We'll get to that
exactly.
later.
Another thing related to that was just in terms of like a positive, I think of how many like gospel-centered resources are out there that, you know, I think of like when Catherine was little, there were like a few books I'd read, but now it's just like inundated with gospel-centered parenting resources. And I'm grateful for those. I'm very grateful for those. So even though it is a lot to sort through, I feel like I just have more information, more help, more guidance than I, you know, in the later years than I did in the beginning.
Yeah. And taking the time to sort through what we use for our parenting, right? Because there are some sources that are better than others, and it matters.
It does.
Yeah.
It definitely does. Yeah.
I remember when I was growing up, the faith-based learning I got. Do you remember Adventures in Odyssey?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That was like my one. That was like my one resource.
Yes. Yep.
But
Good one.
It is. It was a good one. Yeah. Walt was it? Mr.
I don't even
can't
ask me.
remember.
We
Going
weren't
back
like
in
big
time.
into
Yeah.
it.
All
I think
those
we had a
characters.
couple. Yeah, we had a couple.
But yeah, it was just cool. But yeah, now I look at it, raising a daughter in faith. Right. There's so many, even for 5-year-olds, opportunities I have to share good gospel-centered things with her, like the Jesus Storybook Bible and those wonderful things. Oh,
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
And my daughter loves it. Praise God.
Yeah.
So, Hailey, you were talking a little bit about there are a lot of resources, and Becky too. The technology, again, technology is good. Technology has produced a lot of opportunity and insight and information. And kind of in those veins, what about parenting has become easier, and what about parenting has become harder? I know that's kind of a similar question to what we asked, because technology screens can be good in the sense of dispersion of information, but bad in the sense of getting kids hooked. And again, Hailey, you'd mentioned the information overload can be both helpful, but also you feel like you're drowning and you don't know where to start. Yes?
Yeah. I think, in thinking about how to answer that question, it was very much related to that it's easier because there's more help, there's more guidance out there. You can have easier access to the truth and to guidance, but at the same time, it's harder to sort through it all, or to take the time to. Yeah,
we have time as parents.
I don't know.
Yeah, restate the question. I'm like looking at my notes here.
Again,
What
has made, as you look through, because again, Catherine born in 06, Ella born in 07.
Yep.
So in that time span, has there been any developments, or how has parenting become harder, and how has parenting become easier as you track the last 17, 18 years?
Yeah. I mean, I think I know we're going to end up talking about technology, so I think a lot of it does end up in there. And it's just ages and stages. I think of that too, a lot of the questions had to do with you parent your firstborn differently just because they're the guinea pig, And I think of and different kids have different personalities. So
it's not a
part of it is
one-size-fits-all.
is it that things got easier or harder, or is it that each child has their own unique challenges and needs and all that kind of stuff. And just birth order is a thing.
Yes.
It's definitely
For sure.
a thing.
Oh, yeah.
There's just, your first kid is your guinea pig and your last kid is feral, and that's just the way it is. It's just the way it is.
Avery Henry, if you're listening, you are so loved.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I took this a totally different way. And I was thinking that what has made parenting easier through the ages is community, right? And we are so fortunate to be here at Cornerstone, where community is built in our youth ministry programs and our children's ministry programs. And just thinking that there's a benefit there for the kids, but there's a benefit there for the parents too. We don't go at this alone, and that makes parenting easier. Right? And that's true community built on Christ with the goal of seeing our kids know and love Jesus and serve him.
And I think too, like, to touch on that, it's not even just that, oh, my kids went to Awana and Wacko and youth group and young adult, whatever, but that our church incorporates teenagers into
very
every
life of the
ministry.
church. Yep.
And so my kids aren't just being given to, it's expected that they're giving. You know what I mean? So, I mean, yeah, just even the way Lauren does, like, 6th grade, are you going to, attend as a student to VBS, or are you going to serve in VBS? Like, it's just opportunities for service and giving that are just expected. That's part of the community here. And I think that is helpful for me, because then it's like, I'm not having to come up with those things on my own as a parent. Like, okay, we're going to go do this, we're going to go do that. It's the church body as a whole is incorporating you into it. And that's the way it's supposed to be.
Exactly. And we, again, getting ahead of ourselves, especially in youth ministries and churches, right? When we treat students as people to download information into rather than live out a life of faith, we fail.
Right. Right.
So yes, while we're certainly not a perfect church, we do expect service.
Yeah.
It's almost like Jesus said, go and make, right?
Right.
And he doesn't say, oh, but only when you reach a certain age.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And they want to be needed.
Yeah.
They know they have things to give, and that for other adults to see that and give them opportunity to use those gifts and hone those. And that makes parenting easier
And
when you have your village.
And the Lord has prepared good works for all who love him and follow him. And that is our children too. Yeah.
And especially being here, like I remember walking in just for, it was like an interview, and there was a family night going on. And there were so many families in my age and stage. I just remember looking like, what?
Yeah.
But we've started we've even at the church, we've started a Discord group for dads, which is like this.
Love it.
And we just continually encourage one another and pray for one another and share our faults, gasp. And there's also a fair amount of dad jokes that are shared as well.
Oh, I'm sure.
But there's something to be said for talking with other men who love Jesus, who are waking up in the middle of the night to change their kids' diapers, who are dealing with tantrums, who are going through all of these neurological developments in children. And we'd be like, yeah, that's really hard. And yet it's just a season and we'll get through it together.
Yeah.
So I agree with both of you on that.
Yeah.
So looking as you being parents of mostly teenagers, I think, what do you say, Avery and Henry are 12. In the last 6 years, what would you say your teenagers have needed most from you? Right, from when they entered into adolescence, and then speaking and having walked now again for 6 years with teenagers, what do you say they need the most right now from you as parents?
Actual face-to-face time. And that gets tricky with teenager schedules, right? Then you have drivers and then they're working. And so it evolves through the teenage years, but the need doesn't change. They need us because they look up to us and we can point them in godly directions, right? And I think it's tricky because they're becoming more independent. But at the same time, they still need to know that home base is there and supports them and has their back as they start to take steps towards dependence where they're going to fail, they're going to succeed, but they know that we're there.
What does face-to-face look like for your family?
It depends, right? But face-to-face through the years has at least been like family devotional time or a game night or just being together, and increasingly without devices, right? Where we can just look up at each other and engage and chit chat in whatever form that takes. So
I would say to piggyback on that, like family dinner time has always been something that's like important to me. That like we all sit down together at the same time, and same thing. Like when you get older kids and they're working and traveling and stuff like that, or even like Darren's schedule is kind of you never really know when he's going to be done with work or whatever. Prioritizing that, like I know we usually eat at 5, but today we're going to eat at 6:30 because Catherine gets home from work at 6:15. So trying to preserve that and make that, and even like for Catherine who's like, but I want to whisk right off to the next thing. I'm like, come and sit and have family dinner time. And I get that will be fewer and farther between, but protecting that and guarding that as best I can over the years. And then, I mean, I feel like that's together time, but like when you're talking like the one-on-one time, when they're younger, it's like, okay, like bedtime routines and like I'd go from each kid to each kid, and bedtime was this 2-hour event because each kid needed me to read the books and the Bible study and pray for them. And then you go on to the next kid and all that kind of stuff. And then now Catherine, like I've kind of grown out of habit of that, and so it's like usually I go in and she's like texting her on the phone with somebody if she's even home. Yeah. And so it's like, oh, I'm interrupting. But every once in a while I do get one of those days too where she's like, come sit on the bed and cha-cha-cha-cha. And I'm like, oh, the guy's sleeping. There's like that part of me, it's like, this is so precious. I don't know how many more of these I'm going to have. Yeah. Right. Versus like, I am dying on the vine right now. So try and find those. And then I feel like as they get older, it's like coffee dates, like for me, it's like, oh, hey, we need to plan a coffee date. And like Catherine for Mother's Day, she was like, Mom, let's go out. I'll buy you coffee. Have we gone on that date yet? No, we have not. And like every time there's a little opportunity, you think we can do coffee? No.
Oh, well,
like
when I
see today, there's an opportunity. And she's like, no, I want to go sit out by the pool. Okay.
When I see her at paint night tonight, I'll be like, hey,
yes. Teenagers who are listening, your parents want to have coffee dates. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned too. I feel like our bedtime routine is just I have to read the same book 3 times. Yes. And
but that's special.
And there are times where I'm just like, but then again, I'm remembering too, like there's just gonna come a day where she's like, no, Dad. Mm-hmm. So.
Right. And then someday you're going to be cleaning out those books and she's going to be like, I get that one because I have 3 kids that might be fighting over the same book that was special for all of them. And you better buy multiple copies. Oh, yeah. That's right. For the grandchildren.
Yeah. And then, in family devotional time, something that is just so important that not only that our kids read our Bibles, but our kids see us reading our Bibles.
Well, my biggest first response to the question was, what do they need most from us is we're walking the walk and not just talking the talk. So like, I think what my kids need most from me, yes, they need that one-on-one time. They still need our guidance and stuff, but they need to see me doing the things that I've been talking about and trying to do with them all along. Like, Mom's still reading her Bible. Mom's still in ministry. Mom's still praying. Mom's still visiting people. Whatever it is, like I'm walking the walk, and there needs to be zero hypocrisy. Like they can, and when they get to be teenagers, they will call you out. They will call you out. You honest. So my integrity before my kids is very important. And if I even think that, oh man, like that wasn't on the up and up, or they saw that, like I have to go to them and confess it and
that habit of confessing and offering grace and forgiveness started early.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because I blew it as a mom a million times.
Right. How many
up until now, right? And so in those moments, instead of glossing over, it was really living out the grace that the Lord gives and the forgiveness that he offers from me to my child, right?
Yep.
And so that's been a practiced thing.
Yes. Say you're
through
sorry.
The years. Yeah.
And they're always quick to forget. It's okay, Mom. I know.
Well, but
here I am again.
You want to talk about parenting shifts too? I mean, the practice of confessing to your kids, saying I'm sorry to my kids.
A lot.
Yeah, a lot. But that didn't. I mean, right? I have my own story, but my mom never once apologized to me. Never once. And I, to this day, whenever I do something wrong, I think of my mom and I say, I will never make my daughter feel that way. When I am wrong, she will hear it from me.
It's so interesting how with our own parents, it can go one or the other. Either like, I do not want to be like that, and we make a very intentional effort.
Or this is how it's always been, and so it needs to stay this way. Yep.
That too. Or this was so good, and I want to be intentional about doing that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's I never really understood generational sin in the Bible until I became a parent.
Become
And it's
They're
like
gonna
when we
become our
parent
parents
out
by
of,
default.
when we parent out of what we know
Right.
and what we've experienced, yeah, that's been fun.
I actually asked my kids this question because I was afraid, like, oh, I know what my kids need, and they're probably thinking,
Yeah.
"You're wrong, Mom. That's not what we
What
really
did
need."
they say?
I'm trying to think if Catherine even got back to me and answered that question. But Faith was just like, yeah, just the things we've talked about. Yeah, just consistency, spending time with us, discipline, teaching us about God's word.
That's how teenagers spell
Catherine?
love, by the way. Time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Catherine's usually like, discipline, Mom, discipline. I'm so glad you disciplined us. And then I'm like, but you're,
Yeah.
part of it's just, becoming an adult. I'm like, you're the one that bucks it the most, but you're so big on
I want your
discipline.
I want your discipline
Yeah.
when I want it, Mom.
Yeah, she knows. Yeah, I guess she knows she needs it. She knows. Yeah, she's kind of funny. So funny. Yeah, having older teenagers tell you about your parenting.
Yeah. Humbling.
What was good and what was
Humbling.
bad. Yes.
Humbling and maybe even
Yeah.
encouraging. Oh, I did something right. And
Yeah.
by the way, having spent extensive time with your kids, you're doing something right.
Thank you.
But hey,
good
let's
word.
let's shift a little bit into technology. Probably the biggest, again, especially to the parents listening, probably the biggest battle, if you will, going on. Our kids are digital natives. They've grown up around screens their entire lives. Again, 2006 and 2007. That's about the time the iPhone came out.
Yeah.
So they've grown up around this technology, this constant attention seeker. And Kara asked me this morning, she's like, "Daddy, what's TikTok?" And I said, "Oh, it's brain rot." She's like, "What's that?" I was like, "It's just something that if you spend too much time with it, you
Right.
just don't get smarter."
Yes. There you go. That's a good way to
So,
say it.
but they're digital natives. They don't understand life without screens and phones like we do. How have you managed their lives around these screens and devices? And and as we talk again, I study this way too much, but I think parents are regularly now giving 4th and 5th graders smartphones.
Right.
Right. So I didn't feel that pressure. I think because we're just a little bit further ahead in the parenting stages, but to give at that young, does that make sense?
Yeah.
I didn't feel that pressure to give devices that young to my children, but I know that that's real now. But from the beginning, we've told them that their phone and even their screen time was a privilege that could be taken away at any moment, especially their personal phone, right? So we've been, just setting up boundaries with them, telling them their phone is a privilege, that it should be used if at all possible to edify, right? And just sort of keeping those big goals in mind as they use it. But I'll just start there.
Yeah. I would say, I think before, your first kid's your guinea pig, right? So Catherine, maybe about middle school age, even before that, actually, I want to say she was around 9 and wanted to have a device because she wanted to text her friends. She wanted to be able to take pictures, some of the more benign elements of a smartphone. And so we had said, okay. And at the time, I think Apple was still making the iPod Touch.
Yeah, the
whatever it
iPod
was.
Touches,
It's
where if it's
basically-
connected to Wi-Fi,
Right.
it's essentially a phone.
It's essentially a phone without the ability to call.
Yes.
You can get any of the same apps and all that kind of stuff. And so we're like, if you want that, you can save up your own money and you can buy it. And then it's going to be severely locked down.
Yeah.
And so even at 9 years old, Catherine did that. She saved up. She bought herself an iPod. And so she could do all those things. But it was like, I was using the screen time management feature. So things shut down at certain times. She couldn't get an app unless I approved it.
Good.
It had to be plugged in on the counter, when she wasn't using it. So it wasn't kept in her room. She really didn't use it a lot at the beginning. It was just like, oh, I'll take it, text my friend, take some pictures, or perhaps she had a few games or things like that. But it was but then, as time goes on and it gets more and more and more. And then same thing when she wanted her phone. I'm trying to remember how we handled that in terms of payment, if she bought it or I did, but still wasn't something we thought that she needed. So I think she upgraded to a phone on her own, and then it was okay, social media. Those questions started to be asked around middle school, older middle school area. And I just remember, because I intake a lot of social media myself and was listening to a lot of people that were very adamant, don't give social media to young girls. I was like, absolutely not. Like, I didn't see any bonus to this. I just knew that there's pornography out there, like just all the temptation to compare yourself to things. I just couldn't see any good coming from it. So I was really like kind of holding down, like, no, you can't have it. Meanwhile, all her closest friends were all getting it. And it was getting to a point where she was excluded socially because she didn't have those things. She wasn't a part of conversations that were happening on those apps. Just almost being like persecuted by her friends because she didn't have them.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
it was really bad. It was a low point. For me as a parent looking at her, it was a low point for her socially. And it all was because she did not have those things. So me trying to be the parent doing the things that I thought were protecting her were actually hurting her socially really badly. So I finally gave in when I think it was even before I wanted to give her social media. And so I did let her have some things, and just, we talked a lot about the rules, and she had time limits on them, and we might look at things together and stuff like that. And she would look back and tell me like, Mom, that was the best thing you ever did for me, to give me social media, because she felt hurt socially by not having them.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Not how I saw it playing out. And not feeling like I had other parent support. And I think we did, but Catherine was even a couple of years older than Ella, so you probably weren't quite there yet. But yeah, I just felt like I didn't have other parents supporting the decision I made, and nobody else seemed to be on the same page as me. And it wasn't until years later that I had parents that would come, like, they regretted giving their daughters it early, and had a lot of kind of, negative effects because of it. But even as time has gone on, it's like, Catherine's 18 years old. She still has screen time. Like, there's still things like you can't do. You have to ask permission.
I'm 33 years old. I still have screen time.
Well, yeah, I screen time myself, but you just think it's called ignore. It doesn't do anything. So, and yeah, it went from something that sat on the counter. It's just funny how it evolves over the years to now it is an appendage.
Yes.
It is an appendage. And even, rules about keeping it outside of your room and stuff. And then she started keeping it in as an alarm, or being up late night texting. I go to bed way before my kids do now. And so there's no me checking, did you plug it in outside your room? And I'm like, at this point, you're an adult. You have to manage yourself. But transitioning from helping them to establish boundaries at the very beginning to having more and more independence to now, you really need to do this on your own. And I'm still here to help you, but yeah.
And I was thinking about, as social media becomes something that they can use, that there's a lot of time spent foundationally to look at the content together and say, is this appropriate? I already used the word edifying, but is this edifying?
No.
Is this time that you're spent learning a skill, but should you put it down and maybe go practice that skill? Like, I just think of the bracelet making, right? Watching people make friendship bracelets. Why don't you go actually make the friendship bracelets when you're 12? Right? Instead of watching, go do. And so just a lot of conversations around, is this the best use of your time in your hands? Or could you be doing something to support how God's made you, right?
Yes.
There's a book, I wrote down the name, The TechWise Family.
I was going to recommend that as well.
Such a good, it's a quick read, but it offers tips on putting technology in its proper place. I think that's in the title. But it has been pivotal in our home and how we use technology. And especially even this summer, right?
Yeah, there's so much more free time.
Yeah,
Summer.
right. And it left to their own devices.
Yeah.
That might be all we would do, me included, right? And so just the encouragement to say, here are some things in ways that God has gifted you. Have you used these? Have you practiced these? Have you done this? Have you gone out and been a real person before you pick up your device?
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I think that's key too. And I think that is part of us as parents, like continually educating ourselves. You've got to be reading the books. You've got to be you've got to be listening to the voices out there that are keeping you up on what's going on tech-wise and what you can do. And it's not just like the nitty-gritty. Like, I love TechWise Family because it helped you at a higher level too.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It was more of like concepts and ideas about technology use, but it was also tips and tricks, very specific things like how to shut your thing off or how to move apps out of the way. There was a lot of very practical tools, but there was also a lot of like, let's stop and take a step back and think about what are we made for? What is technology made for? How are you supposed to use your time? And things like that, like what is the place that technology has? And he also has another book with his daughter that they had co-wrote together. That's a great one to do like with your kids. Like you can read
cool.
TechWise as a family. You can read as parents, but there was another one that, I don't know. My kids thought it was maybe a little too easy, but it does have good stuff in it.
Wait, what was that called? Do you remember?
My TechWise Life, maybe?
Okay.
But if you look up Andy Crouch is the name of the author of the book, and if you look
Andy
up his
Crouch.
stuff, then
cool.
his daughter co-wrote it with him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would just say how important it is just to continue to educate yourself as a parent.
Yeah, we have to. And
You've got to be reading, you've got to be learning, you've got to be, because there are so many things. Yes, God's
we have
word
to be
guides.
parenting.
Yes,
Yeah.
and God's word does guide you, obviously, on, principles and things. But there's so much specific that other authors have dedicated themselves to taking those biblical principles and making them specifically applicable to what we're doing today. Parents have to educate themselves. They have to read. You have to be a reader. You have to take it in.
And here's a
Yeah.
verse that came to mind
Yes.
that God has been putting on my heart to kind of challenge my own technology use that then I can challenge my kids with too. But it's 1 Thessalonians 4:11, and it talks about aspiring to live a quiet life, to mind your own affairs, and to work with your own hands. And so that's just something I've been meditating on, and I think it's important for them too.
To ask even ourselves the why. And again, I haven't posted on social media. I posted my second daughter's birth, but since then I was even looking. I hadn't posted in 3 years because again,
For your personal account.
my personal account.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. If you want to follow along with our youth ministry
Like,
account,
you are definitely on social
I
media.
am always posting because I know. Well, one, it's my job, but two, I know that that's where teenagers are. But on my personal account, Becky, I was asking myself the same question of why am I doing this? Right? Is it edifying? Right? And there was a part of me, I can be fully transparent, where like when I first got into ministry, I was like, I want to be like a famous pastor and all those things, and and I'm posting for clout, as the teenagers would say. And then I asked myself, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And I haven't really been able, and I stopped when the pandemic started. And I haven't gone back. And I think to a degree, I was like, I really enjoy the quietness of not constantly thinking about my online profile.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like,
for
and
sure.
so to even from a maturing as an adult stage, I mean, let alone talking to teenagers, like I like that you brought that up, and that kind of like brings together these thoughts that I've had about why don't I post? It's because I like the quiet.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
cool.
And like what you said too about, using your hand, like we're meant to be producers, not consumers.
Yep.
Right. And so social media, just consuming, like
Say
you
that
said,
again.
even for like younger kids now, it blows my mind. Kids are on their iPads and they're watching other kids play video games, or they're watching other kids play with toys. And this just blows my mind. Why is your kid watching other kids playing with toys instead of playing with the toys?
Yeah.
But that's what our kids are doing online. Like they're watching other people do other things versus going and doing them themselves.
And technology is not the enemy.
Right.
But that's just missing out on childhood in so many
Yes.
ways, right? Where,
And it can enhance because, like I think, my kids are on Pinterest and they're, but same thing for us. Like you can have 20 Pinterest boards, but have you ever done anything on them? You're like,
Yeah.
are you actually going and painting with the techniques that you're saving all these pins for? Yeah.
I remember Kelsey and I watched. Have you ever watched Great British Baking Show?
Yeah, a
on
little here and there.
Netflix?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so I remember once I was looking up how to make one of those, and Kara was watching along as I'm watching YouTube, and she's like, Daddy, can we do that together? And now she's like, she loves like these little follow-along videos and whatnot, so we try to make those things together. So.
Yeah.
Yep.
But that moment is few and far between from probably, she would love to watch kids play with toys.
Yes.
Right.
But,
Right.
yeah, but it's true, Hailey.
Do it.
It's like, why we've gone from doers to consumers.
Right.
And again, I think that's very intentional from the companies and even the its designs. Have you seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix?
No.
I haven't. I know you're talking about the documentary.
Which our devices are geared towards pull lever,
Right.
dopamine hit,
Right.
Yeah.
keep you engaged. Our very devices are geared towards keeping us engaged with that device. Continually, they don't want you to be doers, they want you to be consumers. The more you consume, the more money they make, the more attention they get, right? So yeah, we're battling our appendage,
Right.
if you will.
Right.
And yeah, so that's really interesting insight. And then Hailey, too, you had mentioned when Catherine's struggling with social media, all of her friends and being left out, and you felt like you had no support,
Yeah.
right? And I wanted to talk a little bit about peer pressure from parents to give their kids devices and phones at a young age. I've heard a lot of it, of parents like being asked the question, wait, you don't let your kid play video games at a young age? Or you haven't given them a smartphone? Why? And there's a lot of peer pressure in those spaces. And why do you think that is?
I don't
know.
know that I
Neither of you have
a good
experienced this?
answer. No. I think the closest thing would be delayed social media use.
When
But I
did you let your girls go on social media? Do you remember what age?
I would have to ask.
I want to say Catherine was maybe 14 or 15.
Which platforms did you let her have?
Snapchat was the first thing.
Snapchat.
That was the big
that's
one
how teens
that she was
communicate.
doing. And of course, I just got so fixated on that. Like For You, I think it was like basically the catch-all where anybody can scroll through, and it's just absolute trash. It's absolute trash, and it just blows my mind that people are putting that content in front of young kids. The other thing I would say is knowing your kids and knowing when they're ready. And I knew that Catherine could handle that. She's not going to look at that stuff and want to be like that or emulate that. Like by the time she was that age, I knew she could handle that part. But it was still just like, I would hope that she wouldn't just spend time there, because I know how scrolling goes. You know what I mean? It just normalizes all that freakish stuff that is out there. So I was concerned about Snapchat there, but that's where everybody was texting, honestly. Like she would text a friend and they wouldn't text back. But if she Snapchat messaged them, they would message back. I didn't get that. I'm like, I don't understand that, but that's just the reality. That's how it was.
It's true. Well, they like the anonymity, right? It's that growing, becoming your own person, and trying to create that separation, and all of a sudden, like, oh, this is cool and secret and edgy, right?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
That would be
even now, still like the whole streak thing, just like.
Have you seen?
You know, and now, I mean, again, the older and more mature that my girls have gotten, the less that kind of stuff matters. I'm sure they still have a few people they streak with and whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like, but I was concerned about that kind of stuff in the beginning, because I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is stupid. How much time a day are you wasting, like, doing this, which means nothing? It's a picture of the ceiling.
Yes.
Like,
yep.
Why are we doing this? It just made zero sense. But I was like,
It still makes zero sense.
Right. But you are an actual outcast if you don't do that.
Yes,
like, oh,
you are.
Lord.
I took students to British Columbia when I worked with Young Life in Colorado. This was now 7 years ago I did this. And I had students paying other people
to do their
Snapchat.
Yeah, oh my
use
goodness. They give
while
their
they were gone.
friends they give their friends their login. They absolutely assign their best trusted
And
friend
it's literally just
to do them.
You tag, pick a picture of the ceiling, send.
Yeah.
Tag, pick a picture of the ceiling, send.
Yeah, I know.
What?
Yeah, right.
But it's important to them. Right. It's at that time, at that season, in that culture. And how do we lovingly come alongside of them in that? Not, right? Because I still think it's stupid. I do. And I'll tell our teenagers that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not stupid to them.
No.
And so to a degree, I come alongside of them and say, I understand you probably are just wanting connection.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
And I think those check-ins with the teens, especially because they're getting older and maturing along with as they use their social media, but the check-ins of like, is this causing you any problems mentally? How are you feeling after you were just on your social media for an hour?
That is so important.
Right?
Yes.
And just,
Parents need, I've read a lot about that checking in on your kid's emotional state after they've done that. That's so
and there's
important,
so
Becky.
much research. So checking in. And then also just where we were talking about the phone as a privilege, saying at any point I can take this and scan it. And I'm not doing it to spy on you, but just to make sure that everything's still on the up and up and appropriate. Right. And I know that there's ways to get around parents, but it's the premise. Sure, you can look through my phone. Yep. There's nothing to hide. You know, but just check-ins matter. And that gets harder as they get busier and we get busier, but we really need to keep that a priority.
The other thing that reminded me of that is just like with the time limits or like app limits that I have set with like through the screen time. Like I remember one of my kids wanting a chance to like, can I manage my own? Yes, that's the ultimate goal. We want you to have the tools to know, because I'm like, and I would say all the time, I'm like, I get it. I get sucked in too. Like I give myself screen time limits and I ignore them. Like I sometimes look at my stats and I'm like, how did I spend that much time? So I said, I get it. So yes, why don't you try managing your own? I'll take my thing off and I can still look at your stats, but I'm not setting limits.
Yeah.
And so, a few weeks would go by and we'd look at the stats together like, oh, did you realize you're spending 3 hours a day on TikTok?
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Can you take it back over, Mom? Yes.
Yeah.
Knowing that they don't have the self-control and they need those outer limits. And I would always say, like, I wish I had somebody else, like, that was doing that for me, that I can't hit ignore. I can't hit 1 more minute or whatever it is.
And you make a good point about self-control, right?
Yeah.
Still developing.
Yeah.
Self-control is difficult for adults, let alone teenagers. And if you give something to someone that's addicting, it's like giving your kid a drug and expecting them not to get addicted, right? So when we give our kids things and then we're like, wait, why are you on it all the time? Why? I gave you a drug and now you're addicted to it? What? Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that constant privilege instead of rights and monitoring and conversation. So, and then to kind of end our conversation on technology before we go into parenting styles, what would you say to the parent listening to this podcast right now whose kid is wildly addicted to their phone, always on video games, staying up till the late hours of the night even, and every time you try to put limits in place, there's just fights and anger, and it feels like they've lost all hope that they will be able to get this under control. What do you say to them?
That's tough. Stay the course, right? The Lord leads and guides, and we know what is good for our children, and sometimes taking them away is the hardest part, right? But yeah, I think I would go back to God has made you with gifts and talents. We talked about this. Are you taking time to do these things first before you go to those screens, right? And just encouraging them to engage in different ways in actual real life before they pick up a device. I think sometimes the problem can be more than that, though, right? It could be deep-seated.
Yeah.
And then I think you might need some other resources. But my first encouragement would be stay the course as a parent. You know what's good for them, and encourage them to be doing the things they're made to do.
I was going to say the same thing. Like sometimes it's just to even confess as a parent. Again, that's an opportunity to be like, I've let you get to this point, really. Like I haven't parented the way God wanted me to let you get to this point. So confessing that like I was lazy where I should have been more vigilant, or sometimes it's just because you didn't know. Like there's things I look back and I'm like, oh, I didn't know. I missed that. I wasn't on the up and up. And like, I'm sorry, I didn't know better. And there's other times when I'm like, you just wore me down and I gave up and I'm sorry for giving up. So I think, again, that confession, like go to your child and say, it's partly my responsibility that you've gotten to where you are now. And I'm sorry about that. But now I'm going to parent like I should have a while back.
And it's never too late to start.
And it's never too late to start over. Literally shut it down. Take those things away. Take away the video games. But like you said, you have to replace it with something else.
Yeah.
You have to replace it with something productive. You need to start a hobby. You need to be involved in, you need purpose. I think social media addictions like that, they suck away all your purpose. And so you're left with, you take that away, you have nothing. You don't have real community. You don't have real gifts. You don't have real ministry you're in. You know what I mean? Like you gotta replace what you're taking away with something else that's really life-giving, because those things are life-sucking. They're killing you. And you need something that's gonna cultivate you and cultivate others. That's what I would say. Yeah. It's time to find a new hobby. And like you said, yes, there's a lot of times probably additional resources are needed, additional professional help or something, but it's not too late to parent and stuff in. That's what I would say.
And even coming alongside, right? Like So I don't know, say that every night after dinner they go and grab their device. And you would say, I'm not going to grab my device either at that same time. I'm going to join you in your struggle here to not engage in this way. Let's do something together, or just to make a plan that's intentional to help overcome.
Yeah, I think, again, you're both absolutely spot on. And even I was thinking, too, when we talk about, I think sometimes maybe not even peer pressure, but just giving into the fact that parenting is hard. And so you're like, oh, my kid is distracted, so I get a break, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so maybe that could have even been a better way to phrase it right? But then oftentimes, like, we can let that go on too long. And like, oh, I'm getting this break that I need, but then my kid is struggling, and we just have to come back to, I have to parent. And that's hard, and parenting is for the weak, and yet also requires incredible strength and submission. And so when we're talking about, again, coming alongside, filling it with something, coming alongside and doing those check-ins and being super intentional, I think our kids will realize when they see it from us that there is more life there than just...
And I think we're old enough that we had life without screens ourselves, so we know what that's like. Like, I went every day of my life, every moment of my life without something. So, like, I knew what to do. I figured it out. So I can help my kids with that. But they're going to grow up and never had that.
Yeah.
They didn't know how
They
to
don't know
live a
how to
life
be...
without it.
As I heard it, someone said, teenagers and kids don't know how to be bored.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We were bored. And so we
Yeah.
would just, like, play with rocks. Right? Until we
Whatever.
figured something out.
Right.
But boredom is not bad. Boredom
No, it's
breeds
so good.
creativity.
So good.
So when my daughter says I'm bored, I say,
Great.
Good.
Yep.
I'm doing my job.
Good.
Yeah.
Go figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Technology is so loud. There's so many voices, right? And I think of the verse that says, be still and know that I am God.
They don't
46:10.
like
They-
to be.
No idea.
No. The
I think
quiet.
still, to be still in this culture, you have to be intentional, and it's hard because it's busy and it's loud. But in the summer, when there's more time with my kids, that's something I've been challenging them on, right? You might be bored, but it's an opportunity to be still and know I'm God. It's okay, right?
Right. And not even music.
And what?
Yeah.
Not even music
Not
on. Like
even music.
actual
Yeah.
stillness and quietness by
Just-
yourself. That our kids' generation
that's
really
powerful.
struggles with that.
That almost in a good way speaks more into the silence speaks more than the noise in a good way.
I think that can be intimidating too.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? If you use all the things to numb all the feelings.
Well, that's what
and
it is.
thoughts
It's
and
numbing
stay
and
busy
distract.
and you don't
Numb and
wanna
distract.
think.
Right. I don't want
Yeah.
to think about it.
So it's important.
I heard someone once said that when you get rid of all the distractions, right, and you stop racing through life by distracting yourself and numbing yourself, and you actually are still, all of the emotions and all the things you've been running from catch up. And so that's daunting and scary too, because you know that when you stop, you're going to eventually have to deal with the things that you've been running from.
Well, yeah, I guess it's like a dam, right? Where if that's the way you live on a regular basis, those emotions are just trickling through. It's
Yeah.
a stream, it's a constant trickle. But when you never stop,
Yeah.
it's building up and it's building up. And now you're going to suddenly be absolutely quiet and the dam breaks. And that is probably really intimidating.
Excellent
Yeah.
segue too to talk about parenting styles, because we got to keep moving. Again, I could talk to you two forever. But so it was interesting too when I texted you about these questions. You said, yeah, and I told you about we come from a helicopter parent generation, but now the new parenting is snowplow parenting or lawnmower parenting, and you both were like,
What
is that?
I had to Google that.
But right, and which is awesome. But psychologists have we've moved away from this always parent monitoring everything we're doing and kind of hovering over the top of us to now we believe, right, we don't want our 30,000 feet parenting, right? It seems like a good idea to clear all the obstacles, all the pain, all of the trials out of your kids' way. We don't want our kids to hurt, right? We're not sadistic. But at the same time, by clearing everything out of the way or by acting as a dam to all the trials of our kids' lives, eventually they're going to deal with pain and hurt and suffering and failure. And if we haven't given them the proper tools to cope, when that dam breaks, their lives come crashing down. And I'm gonna give an example of this before we get into it. I hear your thoughts. This is an extreme example, but there was a young woman, grew up in California and ended up going to the University of Stanford. Great school. My dad actually got into Stanford and instead chose to go to UCLA because of a girl. Dad, what are you doing? You could have gone but that's neither here nor there. But she grew up hating red sauce, like marinara sauce. Hated it.
Okay.
And her parents would go out of their way anytime she went anywhere to make sure that she didn't have to deal with red sauce. If she would go to her friend's house, please make sure there's no red sauce. Cafeterias, anywhere she went, like they would call ahead, make sure she didn't have to deal with it. You get to Stanford and this cafeteria there's red marinara sauce. It was so overwhelming for her that she had to leave Stanford.
Oh, goodness.
Now, is that an extreme case?
Yeah.
Yes. But it's also an example of trying to remove all obstacles out of your kid's way so that in theory, thinking you're being a good parent, but you're actually denying them necessary development skills. So my question to you is, why do you think this has occurred? Why have we shifted from helicopter to lawnmower?
I'm not exactly sure why, but there is a common element there that I've had to deal with too, which is the perceived control we have as we parent, whether that's helicopter micromanaging or removing all failures that we could possibly see or chance for failure, right? But the Lord has worked with me through the years, actually from a very early stage. I'll just backtrack. When Ella was young, Brian worked out of the home. I was home for the summer with her, and it was just her and I. She was little. And I remember praying to God in a moment and saying, Lord, I could parent out of fear. I could parent out of micromanagement and control, but I'm pretty sure that's not what you have for me. And how did I know? Because I was full of anxiety and not trust and not faith. And I was sitting on the red couch in our living room, and I just prayed, Lord, help me to enjoy every age and stage with this child and to trust you. And that has helped me and been like a beacon anytime I'm prone to any of those elements of perceived control, right? And I think through the years, God has also been faithful to show that I don't have control, but he does, and he can be trusted, right? And so I don't want to get in the way of him, right? I want to be in his will. I want my kids to be in his will. And so, yeah.
That's good. I think related to that, though, because I was thinking the same thing, I have no idea why. I'm like, well, maybe I do. I think for our generation, the temptation is for our kids to be a reflection of ourselves, an extension of ourselves. And if my kids are doing everything right or things you said, then it looks good on me, you know? And so I can see maybe times where we want to, the control, right? I think that's what it is. Like, yeah, we want to control. Why do we want to control? So that we look good. We look like good parents, or look at our kids as an extension of us. Versus if I don't try to control this area, then what if they make a big mistake? Or what if they have to suffer through this pain? And then that might make me look like a bad parent. Like, oh, I didn't do something right, because then my kid wouldn't be in this situation. So I'm just going to try to control everything so that my family, me and my kids, look good. We're good. That's the only thing I can think. Like, I know I've done that.
It makes sense.
I know I've done that.
Oh, sure.
But yeah, I don't know.
Brian had another insight too. I was asking, I was like, you should just be on this podcast.
Yeah, we need to read about it with the dads.
Do it with the dads. Ask the same questions. See what happens.
I will. I would love that.
Yes.
I would love to
Yes.
get Darren and Brian
Let's
here.
do
That'd be
it.
so fun.
Let's do it.
But he was talking about how when you clear out all the obstacles, that might be a quick way to success for your child, a short-term view versus the long-term view of what really is success for your child. It's Christ-like character so that they can stand on their own 2 feet with the Lord, right? That's the goal, to move them towards him.
Yeah, I think that's good because then they're not relying on you, they're relying on him. Where otherwise it's like, Mom, can you fix this? Mom, can you do that? Mom, can you? And we're like, oh, yes, honey,
Yeah.
you know, and let me just cater to all your little needs versus figured out or, you know.
Yeah.
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 I do look back at my own parents and it's funny how there's things I just forgot about or wouldn't think about until you're a parent, you know, and I'm looking back, I'm like, even things like filling out forms, stupid stuff, you know, like having had a first job and it was like time to do taxes.
Yeah.
When I had my first job, my dad was like, so you'll find the forms at the library. That was it. I had to get myself to the library. I had to figure out which forms I needed. I had to figure out how to fill them out by myself.
Yeah.
It was a struggle. I remember being a little irritated.
Yeah.
But I did it, and now I can figure things out.
Yes.
I can be resourceful. You know what I mean? And so when Catherine, it came time, for some reason I remembered that, and I was like, okay, we'll give you, we'll get you the forms. Like, Dad can give you the forms, and you got to read the instructions and figure it out. I think Darren ended up doing it with her, or mostly for her. But I was like, that was something she needed to figure out by herself, you know?
Darren, that's like his word. That's like his livelihood. He's like,
I just look back at all the things, like, my parents didn't do practically anything for me. Like, I just had to figure it all out. I had to look other adults in the eye and ask them for a job or tell them, you know what I mean? Like, there's just like, I had to do all that. Nobody did it for me. And I think, I don't know why we are inclined to want to do all that, those little things for our kids when we should.
Yeah.
I remember too. Actually, I had to do those things. I remember actually, and I joke with teenagers sometimes that I remember when we had to have phones that were connected to cords.
Yeah.
And you had to call people's houses.
Yes.
And you had to talk,
And talk to the
And
adult
the parent
Adults?
would answer the phone.
Yeah, and like when I was calling my girlfriend's house, and I had to be like, "Hello, Mister, is so and so there?" And
Right.
Who is this?
Who is this?
Yes. My mother knew every single person that I talked to
man.
and how long I was on
You
the phone
all
with them.
don't have to deal with that.
Right.
But
So true.
It
total
produces character. I think
It
just
does.
that, like perseverance produces
does.
character. If we're not allowing our kids the chance to persevere, then we're
and
preventing
Yes.
them from building character.
and when we prevent them from dealing character, developing character, we get what a lot of people have been writing about, this teenage fragility. And I'm not talking about all teenagers. We all go through our developmental stuff.
Yeah.
But increasingly, we're seeing more and more, and I'm not belittling mental health. I'm not belittling anxiety. I'm not saying
right.
those things aren't real and just get over it and pray harder.
Right.
Right? But there is a rise in the inability to cope with failure. There's an inability to rise with inconvenient and to deal with inconvenience, right? And so my question to the both of you is, how are you developing resilience and coping and healthy coping mechanisms in your kids?
Lots of conversations. We are sensitive people in our house. We feel a lot of things. There's a lot of emotion. And so we've had opportunity to talk about the hard things and why God has called us to do hard things and not avoid them. There's actually a book by that title called Do Hard Things. And my oldest daughter read it probably when she was like 12 or 13. And it just challenges the status quo. I mean, that was my main takeaway, is that God has called you to a purpose and a plan.
That book's older, yes?
Oh, yeah.
Old. Oh, yeah. It's so
I read,
old.
I read that book when I was
The Harris boys wrote it.
I was a teenager.
Not the one that
Yeah.
deconstructed his face and said, I don't think.
Oh, Josh Harris.
Right. But just the premise that God has called you with a plan and a purpose.
Yeah.
And you're not always going to feel confident in everything he asks us to do because he grows us. But it's okay. How can I support you as you take your next step? You need to take the next step.
Yeah.
I know you're afraid, but I'm going to pray for you as you do it.
Yeah.
Right. And just really being open about those things. And also that as an adult, I still struggle with that too. And I let my kids know. Right. Like, but we have the Lord.
Yeah.
Right? He equips us. And above all else, that's what I want them to know. I want them to walk in faith, knowing that he's with them to equip them and that he's worthy.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's good. It's funny because when I first read that question, I was like, ooh, I don't know. Like, this isn't anything I've been intentional about at all. I was like, so my first thought was like, crap, like major parenting fail here. Like, what are we doing? And so then I like texted the girls the question. I was like, it was like late at night. I was doing this one time. So I'm like, hey, like, this is a question Josh was asking me. And I'm like, what do you guys think? Like, do you think I failed you in this area? And so, Catherine the next day, she's just like, oh my gosh, Mom, we just bucket and get over it, like whatever. Like, she's just to your thing, like, we're not sensitive people in our house. Like, Darren and I are not sensitive people. Like, everything rolls off of our backs. Like, it takes a lot. We're just not emotional and sensitive people. So I think part of it is just that my kids have grown up and like, that's just the way it is around here. So I don't know if part of it is just personalities. Different personalities. Yes, more people are prone to that. But then I'm like, part of it is like, okay, girls. Like, we have all girls. Girls are very emotional. You go through the teenage years, the hormones are up and down. And so I think a lot of it for me, I just chuck it up to, it's hormones. It's hormones. And it's also different personalities. Like, I have certain kids that are more emotional than others. But I guess, and part of me was, that's why I had to ask them, because I'm like, gosh, are you feeling really fragile and suffering in a way that I've overlooked because I'm not emotional? Like, have I been too hard or too tough, and you feel ill-equipped? And no, the girls came back to me like, no, Mom. So I feel like I'm a bad person to ask that. And then it started making me think more of like, why, like, I don't know. We have a stable home.
Yeah.
We're just kind of chill people.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. But I wish I had more to offer them.
But that's
I don't. So maybe maybe my kids need more, and I haven't provided it for them. And
I mean,
yeah, I
I don't think so.
I don't know how to.
You and Darren are.
I feel bad.
Are but no, like,
Don't feel bad.
Don't feel bad, right? Well, I can't tell anybody how to feel. But,
yeah, no. But that was just like a big, like, oh my gosh, I've done nothing. We've had no emotional regulation conversation. My kids are crying themselves to sleep every night.
Well, no, but in interaction, they all of your kids, I've never really like come across and been like, ooh, like, wow, you really need to develop coping mechanisms. Like, I've never like thought that about about your kids.
To step back about 8 years, we spent many hours at my kitchen table.
Am I just forgetting?
No. We spent many hours at my kitchen table during lessons, right? Carving out time to pray, which just was such a gift. Thank you for initiating that. But praying that some of those skills that looked like strong will or needed necessary self-control, I'm just thinking how God answered those prayers. Because we prayed that those things that looked negative then would be harnessed by God to be used for his glory. And so he really has been faithful to answer prayers.
Thank you, Becky.
Yeah.
Maybe you're right.
No, that's true. I'm a very forgetful person, so there's...
And so much of that character development happens when the kids are young, too, right? And it continues through the teenage years. But,
And to your credit, too, you talked about, you've provided a stable home.
Yeah.
Right? And you've given them that security. Whereas, again, increasingly, teenagers and kids are growing up from broken homes.
That's true.
I mean, well, we're all broken, right? We're all sinners and
Mm-hmm.
in desperate need of Jesus. But to a degree, right, that stability that you offered through your marriage and the way that you interact with your husbands and the way you interact with your kids and the stability and health of your family goes a long way in providing that emotional security for your kids growing up.
I think that's true.
So you also, just by having a strong marriage and strong family, you've given them those tools.
Which has not been anything of our own doing, right? No. That someone would hear this and think that we think we have a perfect family.
Yeah, oh my gosh, no.
No. Just reliance in prayer in the Lord, right? Constantly. That's the only way we could claim anything remotely close to that.
That is a good reminder, though, of just prayer.
Yeah.
We are so prone to forget things that we're like, oh, I wish this was different, but I'm not. You have not because you ask not. And I think, too, there are things that, like, because birth order and, first kids being guinea pigs and second, you know what I mean? Like, things that I probably like, oh, this is, like first kid. By the second kid, I'm like, we know how to do this. And like, I'm the third kid. Sparrow. Like that, it reminds me that like, it's funny because even like, Lauren does the parenting, Bible studies, book groups like every year, and I've never done them. She's been doing these for years, and I'm like, I've read the books, I've done the thing, but I'm like, he was only 12. I could probably use a refresh, And I'm like,
Yeah.
I need to remember. I need to remember, like,
Yeah.
what did I do with Catherine that maybe I'm not doing with Avery?
Yeah.
Like, there probably are conversations or people I was praying with about, obviously I was, that maybe I'm not doing that right now. Yeah. Humility.
Oh, so much. And I like,
Yes.
so you've quoted Psalm 46 a couple times, and when we talk about being still, that Hebrew there can actually be translated loosen your grip.
Huh.
Right?
Neat.
So when we're trying to control everything, and we talk about prayer, which is just coming before a perfect God and saying, I'm in desperate need of you.
Yeah.
Amen.
Right. So I'm loosening my grip and I'm taking my eyes off of myself and my own abilities and my own desires for my kids and saying, God, I want your desires for my kids.
Yeah.
That takes a massive amount of humility.
Yeah.
And when our kids see us too relying on a good and perfect God, it teaches them that I don't have to rely on my own strength, which is
Right.
imperfect and will fail me. And instead rely on God, which is probably the best coping mechanism I think we could probably give our kids is
Yeah.
put your hope and trust in a God who sees you and
right.
is in control.
Yes.
I'm looking at my notes. I'm like, oh yeah, just things like, and because it kind of pertains to an upcoming question about like discipleship and stuff, but just, I think the things that I've done to try to instill habits, like spiritual habits for my kids of, you are in the Word on your own each day.
Yeah.
You're spending time in prayer each day. Carving out that time for you. We've modeled this, how to do it. I've done it with you, and now you're doing it on your own. That I guess I take for granted. What are they doing on their own? Like they are in the Word and they are praying, and God is working through that, their own relationship with Him, where maybe things that I think, oh gosh, I needed to do that. No, like the Lord is ministering to them and teaching them and equipping them and comforting them. You know what I mean? So there are things that I feel like, oh my God, like I haven't done things. God is doing what He's He's supposed to do. So maybe there's a big part of that too, that they have their own, if they have their own relationship with the Lord, He is helping them through those things.
Draw near to me and I will draw near to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one before we step into discipleship, which again is just I've been so fascinated by even just discipling a 5-year-old. Right, when just getting to she makes up songs about Jesus all the time now, which is just so
record
them.
Those
Okay,
so that you can
I
go
don't know
back
if I
and
sent
it will
it to
bless
you.
your heart years later. And you're like,
was,
do you even know Jesus?
I remember. I think I sent it to Becky Hailey. I don't know if you saw it.
Beautiful.
I was playing guitar in the worship center, and and Kara starts singing "Jesus Thank You" along with me.
Beautiful.
It was I have that on video. That's
yeah.
that's a powerful one.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but increasingly parents are looking to be more of a friend to their child rather than a parent. How would you respond to this trend?
Yeah.
Keep going first.
So I was taking the view that the Lord is faithful to provide beautiful times of connection at every age and stage. And that can look like friendship and enjoying your children. It should. They're a gift from Him, right? But if our overall goal through parenting is to be their friend, it's going to be a disadvantage to them, right? They need parents who can provide the boundaries for them, security, that can show them the counsel of the Bible, that shows them the way to go. And then the friendship develops along the way. It just shouldn't be the main priority.
Haley, go ahead.
Does
'Cause I
that
have, no, that I, 'cause
that's good.
I had a thought in my head as you were speaking that I'll share after Haley goes.
Yeah. I don't even remember what your exact question was.
Talking about parents looking to be more of a friend to their
Yeah.
kid rather than disciplinarian.
Yeah. I think, you parent first. And like you said, the friendship develops.
Yeah.
I was kind of talking with Faith a little about this earlier, because she was just like, I don't know, Mom, like, yeah, you know, like, we're friends, and of course I want you to be my friend, and, you know, stuff like that. But she's like, but not like Gilmore Girls, because we watch, I confess we watch a lot of Gilmore Girls, my girls do, and they were just like, Lorelai is like, she just lets Lori, you know, whatever, Lori do anything. And so it's funny, they can watch that with the discernment that yeah, the goal is to parent. Like, our goal is not to be their friend. Our goal is to be their mom and their parent, and the fruit of that is friendship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so as you're both talking, I reckon, so coming from often the helicopter authoritarian, right, and feeling like we're just we can't make any decisions for ourselves, and our lives are being controlled. Maybe that shift is now, well, like, I just don't want my kid to experience that. So, you know, I want to be their friend. But unfortunately, again, when you do that and you care far more, this is the thought I had, care far more about being liked than you do being respected.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
I think that's where the danger is. And and kids are, but I say this all the time, like, I love my daughter. I don't always like her. And I hope too that, like, I care far more about my daughter respecting me and seeing me as a father who provides for her than someone who's like, oh yeah, he's silly and I like him, right?
Because being a friend is easy and disciplining is hard.
Yes.
You know, so trying to be a kid's friend is the lazy route. It really is.
It is.
It's the lazy route, but it doesn't produce a harvest of righteousness. No. Discipline produces a harvest of righteousness by those who've been trained by it. They need discipline. Yeah. I had another thought, and it's a fleeting thought. So.
That's good. Well, let's step into just discipleship a little bit, which is something, again, you two do wonderfully, and I'm excited for the world to get to hear what you have to say on this.
Godly, no.
But increasingly, parents are outsourcing faith development to Sunday school classes. Not so much even, I don't think there's many Sunday school classes anymore. But youth ministry, children's ministry. Why do you believe parents aren't personally discipling their children?
I would say especially, you know, if somebody didn't grow up in a home or wasn't discipled themselves, you just don't know what to do. What is it? You know, so I think a lot of it would probably stem from, I just don't know. I don't know what it is or how to do it. So maybe just a lack of information or education.
Afraid they're going to screw it up.
Yeah, like maybe there's the right way to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know the right way to do it, so I'd rather just not do it. Another thing that I am finding in the stage of life I'm at now is just trying to find the time.
Yeah.
Like we're a homeschool family, and that was one of my biggest reasons why I homeschooled, because I wanted to have that time for just lifestyle discipleship. But especially during summers, we don't have our normal routine. So we're not meeting together regularly, and having older, you know, teenagers with licenses, and they're off and about. I'm finding it really hard to keep up some of the rhythms that we had.
Yeah.
So finding time is a challenge, and I think I can empathize more with families that aren't homeschooling when I'm in the summer and have older kids now, because I'm like, oh yeah, gosh. Yeah. And even the few times I've tried to, like, gather us together just to have something a little formal, the kickback that I've gotten, like, but this was my day off of work and I was gonna do this, and I'm like, but I just want to have some spiritual conversations with my children, and, you know, like, it's hard. It's really hard to find the time to do that. And so, yeah, I have to be very creative and intentional. It's kind of something that's bothering me this summer. Is some of my old tricks aren't working for me anymore.
Along with that, I was thinking how, yes, discipleship time looks different depending upon the season of life, right? So I was feeling the same thing. For example, when the kids were little, most of our family Devo time was around dinner or bedtime, because I worked a lot during dinner time. Then the kids transferred to being in school, and last year I was asking people to pray for our 7:10 devotional time, which was they walk out of the door at like 7:15. So 7:10 was backpacks on the shoulders, and I was reading something to them for the day. And it was funny to see how it morphed. At first they were like, we don't have time, we're running and we gotta go, and it was chaos. And I was like, Lord, is this gonna bear any fruit? And then a few months into it, one of the kids turned around before they walked out and said, are we gonna do our 7:10 devotional? And I was
Nothing is normal until it is.
Yeah. Nothing is normal until it is. But how that worked for the the school time, but how summer is different. I was like, I think our time together is going to either need to be lunchtime or just seizing the opportunity, asking when Ella's work schedule is and being like, all right, you're home then. We're all together for a few minutes
almost
here.
like each day.
Yeah.
Just to keep it going. Right. But another thing I was thinking about with why sometimes we don't disciple our children, and I've fallen into this too, is I'm tired.
Yeah.
It can feel inconvenient. There were times that our family devotional at dinner looked like a 3-ring circus. I remember I asked Brian if I could share this one. I'm like, can we talk about that time? He's like, yeah. But there was one time he was reading, I was sitting there, the kids were playing. It was just chaos. And he turns to me and he goes, are they even listening? And I'm like, oh, yeah. It's fine. Keep going. But he was so frustrated. And I was like, yeah. And along with that, Lauren Bundy, at some point in all these beautiful years of her ministry, she said something to the effect of, don't get stuck on the inconsistency of your devotional time as a family. Just keep going and being consistent. And that really has stuck with me, right? So when it doesn't look like it should, or a day was missed, like just keep going.
That's what I think the biggest thing too is just, you think of like a drip.
Yeah.
Like when you have a leaky ceiling, that bucket fills up really fast. But you just think each drop doesn't matter, right? So you're just like, discipleship is a lifestyle. It doesn't have to just be some formal one-time thing. It's the conversations that you're having, Deuteronomy 5 or 6 or whatever it is that, when you walk along the way, when you get up, when you go to bed.
Can I read it?
Yes, please.
I have it.
You have Deuteronomy 6?
Is that interrupting you then?
No, please.
All right,
do.
and then go
Perfect.
right after.
Perfect.
So love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These words I'm giving you today are to be in your heart. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand, and let them be a symbol on your forehead. Write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates.
Yeah. And so I just like that all day long, whenever you're spending time with your kids, the way you approach anything, right? And I think that just comes back down to you're walking the walk more than you're talking the talk. You have to talk the talk. You can't just live and never talk about things. But you do have to it's just the way you handle every moment throughout the day. But I definitely think it helps to have some intentional rhythms, routines, and practices and habits. Like that Habits of the Household book that you had mentioned, I think maybe before we even started.
Habits of the Household, such a great book.
Such a great book. That is the kind of thing that's very near and dear to my heart is, and I think, anytime you establish any habit, that's hard. To break bad habits and to establish new habits is hard. So if discipling your kids is a matter of habits, which it is, it's hard.
Yeah.
That's why people don't do it. You don't know what to do, and it's hard. It's hard to start.
And it takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
It does, and it doesn't. It can be very simple.
It also requires of us a growing relationship with Jesus.
Right. You can't give what you don't have.
We can't give what we don't have. And so my daughter gets so frustrated with me every morning. I'll make her breakfast, and then I've got my coffee. She's like, Daddy, play. And I'm like, I need to read the word first.
Right.
Yeah.
And some mornings she's like, oh, fine, whatever. Some mornings she's like,
well,
but largely what she's done, initially she would fight me on it, and then she would go off and play with something. Now she's like, well, Daddy, read my devotion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, neat.
And I remember when Catherine and Faith were very little, I was still working full time and I absolutely hamster on a wheel. And the only real time I had, and it was not that intentional, it would be like right before bed, we'd pray, we'd read some little Bible-y book with all the other books he wanted to read. And it was very simple. And that was my spiritual growth. That was probably the only time I was praying every day was with my kids. That was I'd go to church, but I wasn't in any Bible studies or small groups, or I really had a very dry personal devotional life at that point in my life. Like I really wasn't growing much. And I would realize as I'm sitting there reading some silly little, Jesus storybook Bible, or something along those lines, that I was like, my dry, thirsty soul was like soaking that up. And so I would say that like, it doesn't have to be something extra. That can just be all you do is with your kids. It could be a Bible storybook, but like, I hope you can do something more. I wished I was doing something more. But at that time, so it reminded me when you were saying whatever you're doing, bring your kids into it.
Yeah.
Or whatever you want to do for your kids, you're bringing yourself into that, you know? Like, it doesn't matter so much what resource you're using or when you're doing it. You're just praying and talking about God's word together.
And you'd mentioned too something really cool. Oh, Becky, did you have a
No,
thought?
go ahead. I can see.
From Habits of the Household, and I read a book by a pastor too called Dad Tired, Stumbling Your Way to
Yes.
Spiritual Leadership.
Yes, he's good.
Oh,
Yes.
what's his name? Jared Lopes, I think it is. He's in the Pacific Northwest, and he says that all of life is devotional time. You talked about lifestyle discipleship, right? That right, like it's important to have those intentional devotional times, but also don't just think of that as the only time that you're doing devotions. Life is an opportunity, and probably even more important, arguably, is not just the time we're reading the word intentionally, but then when we're showing our kids how to live that out.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, he talked about lifestyle devotionals in his book, which I just thought was fascinating too.
That's neat. And I was thinking, as you're talking, all of life is lived for the Lord, right? And devotional life, and just the importance of where riding together in a car has been through the years, right?
About
Starting
that.
from the beginning, where we would listen to scripture based to music, right? Or we did a Bible study that had a main truth every week. And on the way home, I would be like, oh, guys, Jesus loves you. God is sovereign or in control, right? And just a little truth to think about. And then the car conversations morphed into longer things, right? Where we could engage and discuss. And now it's taken the form of, we're not going to use devices.
Good.
Well, aim to use devices while we're together, right?
Yeah.
So occasionally be like, oh, can you check the hours of that place we're going?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But like the intention is to put the devices down and just chit chat or whatever with each other while we're together. But through the years, that's been a really great discipling space. It's just riding together.
Yeah.
And I have a funny story. You can ask the kids about it. But if you check the side of my minivan, it's a discipling story. Should I tell it now? Or you want to just ask
yes.
them?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
like
great.
the ball.
Okay, it's great. So we were driving one day in the summer, and the kids on the passenger side, like, had the windows down, arms dangling out. I'm driving along, talking. I'm pretty sure it was about social media use or phone use.
Sure.
I get like going about it. So I'm driving and talking, and we go around a corner, and there's 2 trash cans. And I sideswiped the trash cans. I saw them. They were there. I don't know what happened. And I was talking, and I was like, you guys. And they go, Mom, my arm. You almost took up my arm. And I was like, oh, no, we're fine. But the side of the car was damaged. And so we keep driving up the road. We were close to home. I drive past the driveway. They're like, why didn't you go in? I'm like, I'm not ready to go see Dad yet with my damaged car. But the point is, they were like, if you weren't lecturing, that wouldn't have happened. But I don't know about that.
Worth it.
Yeah, worth
Oh,
it.
that's funny.
So the side of my minivan shows
I agree.
discipleship.
I agree 100% that car time is discipleship
Yeah.
time.
And even like Kara and I, especially since Lily's been born, we've been spending a lot more time together.
Yeah.
She's even taken to being like, Daddy, can you turn the radio off? I just like talking. So I'm like, and like, again, I'm sure like, and that's again, I think largely due to my wife also doing that. And I think she just wants to emulate that. So go Kelsey, shout out my wife.
Yeah.
But I've really taken to that. Like even like in the car, and like we get to talk about so much funny stuff. Like the other day she was talking about why is gymnastics called gymnastics. I'm like what is the nastics part of it? And but we get to have to, but then also like she's just so curious about faith.
Yeah.
And getting to talk with her, and she's like, Jesus loves bad guys. Jesus loves bad guys. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So those car conversations I've really come to look forward to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, again, we've already, my next question was kind of talking about habits and practices that you've both enacted. You've largely covered that. So as we closed, each of you, to the parent who's listening to this, and you've given so much great content. You, again, have both admitted freely that you are broken and don't always do the right thing, but also I will encourage you with this. Your kids are incredible. Sinful, but incredible. To the parent listening to this who's just sitting there maybe exhausted, feeling like a failure, what encouragement do you have for them?
I mean, I think it kind of goes along with, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
The, the question you had asked about, if your kid's gone too far with, screen time or whatever. It's just that you know, it's never too late. It's you just start. You know, just I think it always begins with confession, right? That is a feeling of guilt that I did something wrong. And sometimes guilt is not called for, right? Like we shouldn't feel guilty about things. But I think if it's something where you feel like, oh man, I have been negligent in, you know, my parenting or discipleship, to just confess that to God and to your kids. I think sometimes they're just used to the way life always goes. And then all of a sudden you're going to start something new and they're like, hold up. Like if you're going to start establishing some new habits, that could be hard for them, even if it is something good for them. And just start something. Ask. I think Becky and I would both be willing to, if people need, like, how do I get started? What do I do? Like, we could help with that. And
to those listening, they've been a wonderful resource to my wife, who's asked that question, what do I do? And they've been great. So I should both not speak to them, but speak to the both of you. From personal experience, I am reaping the benefits in my marriage and in my parenting because of your work with my wife. So thank you.
Praise God. Yeah.
I would say also pray about it. Obviously, you know what I mean? But just pray and ask God for wisdom, because if you have a desire to do something that is clearly God's will, He is going to help you do it.
I was just thinking very similarly along the lines of, we don't parent alone. As believers, we have the Holy Spirit and the Lord to lead and guide. We have His Word. We have a body of believers. So sometimes it's important to examine the source of failure, right? Is it a voice that is not accurate, coming from the enemy who is an accuser? Then you can pray truth over your parenting, right? And reset in that way. But sometimes, like you said, the Holy Spirit might show us that we've been negligent or you regret something. And then that is what you take before the Lord. In James 1:5, if you desire wisdom, you ask God and He gives it, right? And that's where we don't parent alone. He comes alongside. And His work transforms the heart of our children and transforms our heart too. And it's a beautiful process.
Well, to the both of you, thank you for taking the time to come today. Thank
pleasure.
You for loving Jesus, loving your kiddos. We are so grateful for you.
We're grateful for you.
Yes,
it's fun.
Very grateful.
Anyway, thank you everyone for listening. God bless you.